Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly break down how Nagelsmann won the tactical battle over Diego Simeone to help RB Leipzig advance to the Champions League semi-final. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Atletico Madrid in a 4-4-2 as expected, but the key tactical theme in this game was RB Leipzig's ability to shift from a 4-2-3-1 to a 3-1-5-1. When we analyze both systems, we're able to identify how Nagelsmann was able to win the tactical battle over Simeone. When we looked at RB Leipzig without the ball, they stuck with their 4-2-3-1, and what we ended up seeing was that Poulsen was stepping out to the center backs. Dani Olmo would step into the path of Hector Herrera, but there were times when Saul was on the ball and he would shift over to apply pressure. That would see the wider players in Sabitzer and in Nkunku looking to close down the fullbacks, and what was key here was that Leimer and Campbell were holding their position in the center of the pitch, and that was specifically due to the fact that you always ended up seeing Carrasco and Koke looking to shift central to get on the ball. So they were aware of the movement of the Atletico Madrid wider players, that they do like to tuck in narrow, and that was how they were looking to close them down. And the same thing applied on the opposite flank. If you had Koke shifting out towards the touchline, you would see Angelino stepping into his path, and then he would have cover from Campbell shifting over. Ultimately, that does leave Atletico Madrid with limited options to play into up front, and they consistently try to play through Diego Costa, but he was stifled out of the game by Upamecano. Meanwhile, when we look to RB Leipzig pushing forward, they ended up shifting into a 3-1-5-1. And what we ended up seeing from that Leipzig shape was that they had Klosterman adopting a right center back position that allowed Angelino to push forward at left wing back. But we ended up seeing Leimer shift out into that vacant right channel. So the reason why Nagelsmann did look to shift to this system was based on the fact that now he has two wide players stretching the pitch. And what was key here was that midfield zone. You have Campbell sitting ahead of that back three, and he could sit in that sole role based off the fact that the only real counter-attacking threat that this Atletico Madrid starting lineup did pose was through Yannick Carrasco. And ultimately, with those three attacking midfielders shifting across that center of the pitch, that meant that Atletico Madrid had to keep that narrow shape. So what you ended up seeing was that when Leipzig looked to push forward from the back, they always had 4v2, and even if Hector Herrera did step forward, it would be 4v3, and that's why we often saw Upamecano shifting into that midfield zone to play passes out into the wider areas or through that Atletico Madrid midfield. And then when we look at the positioning of Nkunku, Olmo, and Sabitzer, what we ended up seeing was that Olmo was shifted in between Saul and Hector Herrera, but it was Nkunku and Sabitzer who were shifting into those narrow gaps between the wide players and the central midfielders. So Nkunku's narrow position was occupying Trippier, and that created an avenue for Angelino to push forward down that left channel, whereas Sabitzer was often ahead of Lodi and Jimenez, but he was dropping off ahead of that midfield bank at times as well. But because they were so narrow, that meant that Atletico Madrid had to maintain that shape, and it constantly created avenues for Leimer and Angelino to push forward. In terms of generating quality goal-scoring chances, besides the time where we ended up seeing Olmo and Nkunku darting between the center backs and the fullbacks, majority of RB Leipzig's attacking play stemmed out in the wide areas where they try to create 3v2 overloads. When we look to the right-hand side, it was Klosterman constantly sliding the ball across Carrasco into the path of Leimer, and that would pull out Lodi. On one occasion, we ended up seeing Leimer split Lodi and Carrasco to find Sabitzer dropping into that zone, and that's when they were able to play that quick 1-2, but Leimer's cross into the box was cleared by Jimenez. And the other time we ended up seeing Klosterman's pass across Carrasco see Leimer backheel it beyond Lodi, force Sabitzer darting into that right channel zone, but Jimenez came across to ensure that he couldn't deliver a cross into the box. Meanwhile, on the left-hand side, where we expected Savic and Herrera to replicate Jimenez and Saul's tracking, what we ended up seeing was that Leipzig got into better positions through Angelino pushing forward. When we look to one example, it's Upamecano driving through that midfield zone and splitting Koke and Herrera to find Poulsen just ahead of Trippier. But Poulsen ends up letting the ball run across his body. But when Angelino pushes forward down that left channel, his cross doesn't beat Trippier. If we look to another example, it's Klosterman fizzing a ball across Sabitzer and Saul and Jimenez into the path of Poulsen, who chests the ball down into the path of Olmo. Olmo does a good job of cutting across Jimenez and sliding the ball out to Nkunku ahead of Trippier. What we end up seeing is that Savage steps into the path of Nkunku, but Angelino does make an overlapping run into left half space, but Nkunku's ball into his path is a bit too straight, and Trippier is able to cut across to clear Atletico's lines. And if we look to one final example, it's Campos sliding the ball across Koke into the path of Angelino, which ends up pulling out Trippier, and that's where we see Nkunku running off Koke to receive Angelino's ball in that left channel. When Nkunku receives the ball, it does pull out Savage, but he slides the ball across Savage for Angelino, running in between Trippier and Koke to receive the ball at the edge of the box. But once again, when Angelino's in a quality position, his cross falls into the path of Oblak. Nagelsmann's decision to play in that 3-1-5-1 was rewarded in the second half in the build-up to Leipzig's opening goal. When Poulsen dropped the ball off into the path of Campbell, he was able to slide it across Carrasco, this time into the path of Leimer, adopting that narrow midfield position, with Sabitzer adopting the wing-back role. But when Leimer receives the ball, you see Jimenez stepping out into his path, and Leimer slides the ball across Lodi into the path of Sabitzer. What should be noted here is that you have Poulsen running across Savage to take him out of position, and Olmo now is free to break into the box with Saul tracking him late, and Sabitzer simply clips the ball between Lodi and Jimenez for a free Olmo, who nods his effort beyond Oblak. However, it was Simeone who turned to his bench following Olmo's opener, and what we ended up seeing was Joao Felix came into the game to replace Hector Herrera, and Marcos Llorente ended up dropping off into that midfield zone. And it was Joao Felix's impact in that midfield zone, dropping into pockets of space to receive the ball between the lines, that helped Atletico get back into the game. Initially, it was Carrasco splitting Sabitzer and Leimer to find Joao Felix between the lines, and he slid the ball across Klosterman to find Lodi breaking free in towards the box, but when Upamecano came across, he dove and was booked. Minutes later, it was Jimenez splitting that Leipzig duo once again to find Joao Felix between the lines, this time sliding the ball out into the path of Lodi, who cut across Klosterman and Sabitzer, but Campbell came across to win possession. We saw Carrasco pulling out Klosterman and sliding the ball across Leimer for Joao Felix, and Joao Felix was able to get across Leimer and poke the ball across Sabitzer for Carrasco running off Klosterman, but when he broke into the box, his touch was heavy and Upamecano was able to come across. And when we look to the build-up to Atletico Madrid's equalizer, it's Joao Felix picking up the ball in a deeper position in midfield, skipping past Sabitzer, and then sliding the ball across Campbell for Diego Costa, dropping off the RB Leipzig center backs. Costa ends up sliding the ball back into the path of Joao Felix, breaking beyond Upamecano, but then Klosterman takes him out and he ends up converting the penalty to put the game level. Following Joao Felix's equalizer, the sole tactical shift in the game came through Nagelsmann's substitutions. We ended up seeing Tyler Adams come on and they shifted to a 4-4-2, and then Haidara and Schick were introduced, and Leipzig shifted to a 3-5-2 that became a 5-3-2 out of possession to ensure that they didn't concede late. And while Leipzig's winner was fortuitous, the manner in which they were able to create it stemmed down Nagelsmann's initial route to goal. What we ended up seeing was Sabitzer clipped a loose ball over Trippier into the path of Angelino, and with the Leipzig forwards making a run into the box, that took the center backs and Lodi out of the game. But as stated earlier, Nagelsmann wanted Angelino to break forward down that left-hand side to create chances, and ultimately Nagelsmann was rewarded. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.